On a warm evening in downtown Arlington, the streets buzzed with life as people moved in and out of cafes and shops. The lively atmosphere was filled with chatter and laughter, creating a vibrant scene of city life. Among the crowd, Elijah Grant, a highly decorated Navy SEAL on leave, strolled casually down the sidewalk. Dressed simply in a fitted grey t-shirt, jeans and sneakers, he carried a sleek leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. For the first time in months, he felt at ease, his mind clear of the weight of duty. His destination was a local bookstore, where he planned to pick up a novel he had been meaning to read. The air was crisp with the lingering warmth of the day, and the golden glow of streetlights illuminated the bustling sidewalks. As he walked, he took in the familiar sights and sounds, appreciating the rare moment of peace. However, just as he crossed an intersection, the sharp screech of tires broke his tranquility. A police car pulled up abruptly, and an officer stepped out, his piercing blue eyes scanning the crowd. Elijah barely had time to process the moment before a sharp voice cut through the noise. "Hey, you!" The calm evening had suddenly taken a tense and unexpected turn. As Elijah continued walking toward the bookstore, he was abruptly interrupted by the screech of tires. A police car pulled up to the curb, and from it emerged a tall, sharp-eyed officer. His gaze locked onto Elijah with the intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. "Hey, you!" the officer barked, his tone edged with authority. Elijah paused mid-step, turning his head calmly to meet the officer's gaze. Officer Carden folded his arms, his expression unreadable but his posture rigid with suspicion. "You're in a bit of a hurry, aren't you?" he continued, his voice dripping with an unspoken accusation. "Mind telling me where you're headed?" The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Elijah remained composed, his expression neutral. He had encountered situations far more dangerous than this, and a single officer's suspicion was hardly enough to rattle him. "Just heading to the bookstore," he replied evenly. Carden smirked, his lips curling slightly. "Bookstore, huh?" His gaze flicked to the leather messenger bag slung over Elijah's shoulder. "That bag of yours, what's in it? You carrying anything I should know about?" Elijah recognized the implication immediately. He felt the weight of the stairs around him, the subtle tension thickening the air. A few pedestrians had slowed their steps, sensing the confrontation unfolding. Yet, instead of frustration or anger, Elijah's response was something unexpected, calm confidence. "You want to check?" he asked, his voice steady, almost daring. Elijah stood his ground, his expression calm and unwavering as Officer Carden scrutinized him. He had encountered this kind of situation before: unwarranted suspicion, veiled accusations, and the expectation that he would react in a way that justified the officer's assumptions. But Elijah was not about to give him that satisfaction. His years of military training had taught him discipline, control, and how to maintain composure in the face of provocation. "I'll be the one asking questions," Carden snapped, clearly thrown off by Elijah's lack of fear. His hand hovered near his utility belt, a move meant to intimidate. But Elijah didn't flinch. The tension in the air grew thicker as a small crowd began to form, sensing that this encounter was becoming more than just a routine stop. Phones discreetly emerged from pockets, their owners silently documenting the moment. The weight of the public eye did little to deter Carden, who took a step closer, his boots clicking against the pavement. "Drop the bag," the officer demanded, his voice now harsher, as if raising it might mask his growing uncertainty. Elijah, still completely composed, tilted his head slightly before responding. "Sure." Carefully, he removed the strap from his shoulder, holding the bag out in front of him. His tone wasn't submissive. It was strategic. He wasn't playing the role Carden expected. Instead, he was controlling the situation in his own way, forcing the officer to confront the reality of his own assumptions As Elijah extended his bag, the tension in the air became almost suffocating. The once busy street had slowed, and more pedestrians had stopped to watch. Some whispered among themselves, while others simply observed in silence. The presence of recording phones was undeniable, their lenses capturing every movement, every word exchanged between the two men. Carden hesitated for a brief moment, clearly not expecting Elijah to comply so easily. He had anticipated defiance, resistance that would justify further action. Instead, Elijah remained calm, his demeanor exuding quiet confidence rather than fear. The officer's fingers twitched near his belt, his authority subtly challenged by the unwavering presence of the man before him. The crowd had grown larger now, their murmurs forming an unspoken dialogue. A woman near the front shook her head, muttering, "Here we go again," while another man whispered, "Why him? What's the reason?" The weight of the moment was shifting, and Carden knew it. Despite this, he pressed forward, unwilling to relinquish control. "Hands behind your back," he ordered, reaching for the cuffs on his belt. Elijah raised an eyebrow, his expression betraying no emotion. "Am I under arrest?" he asked, his voice steady. "You're being detained," Carden shot back, avoiding the direct question. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for." A ripple of disbelief passed through the crowd. Elijah let out a slow breath, his lips curving into the faintest of smiles. "That's so," he mused. "Well then, Officer Carden, let's make sure we do this the right way." Carden squared his shoulders, attempting to regain control as he grabbed Elijah's bag and unzipped it. The crowd leaned in slightly, their phones capturing every movement. The tension in the air was thick, an unspoken challenge hanging between the two men. Elijah remained still, his expression unreadable as the officer rummaged through his belongings. Inside the bag, everything was neatly arranged with military precision: a folded book, a stainless steel water bottle, and a sleek black laptop. Carden's fingers brushed against the book first, his brows furrowing as he pulled it out and examined the title. Leadership Under Pressure, a SEAL's Guide to Resilience and Excellence. The irony was lost on the officer, but the murmuring crowd understood immediately. "What's this?" Carden demanded, holding up the book as if it were contraband. Elijah's lips twitched into the faintest smirk. "That's a book I wrote," he replied evenly. His voice was calm, almost amused. Carden blinked, momentarily thrown off. "You wrote this," he repeated, as though the concept was unfathomable. "That's what I said," Elijah answered smoothly. "Want me to autograph it for you, or are you planning to keep digging through my things?" A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd, and Carden's face darkened. His grip on the book tightened before he shoved it back into the bag with unnecessary force. "Cut the attitude," he snapped, clearly flustered. "This isn't over." But as Elijah crossed his arms, watching the officer struggle to maintain control, it was obvious. Carden was the one losing this battle. Elijah watched as Carden continued rifling through his bag, his frustration mounting with each passing second. The officer pulled out the laptop next, inspecting it as if expecting to find something incriminating. When that failed, he moved on to the last item, a small, leather-bound journal. Carden flipped it open, scanning the neatly written pages. His eyes narrowed as he skimmed over an entry that read, "You don't fight for recognition. You fight because it's the right thing to do. Leadership isn't about power, it's about service." For a moment, Carden hesitated. Something in those words seemed to strike a chord, though he quickly masked his reaction. Meanwhile, the crowd around them grew more restless. More people had gathered, their murmurs forming an audible hum of anticipation. Elijah tilted his head slightly, his voice steady but laced with quiet challenge. "Anything illegal in there, officer?" Carden slammed the journal shut and shoved it back into the bag, his frustration now written all over his face. "You're free to go," he barked, stepping back as if trying to reclaim his authority. Elijah didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms, his expression unimpressed. "Not so fast," he said, his tone low but commanding. "You stopped me, accused me of fitting a description, and searched my belongings in front of all these people. I think we're owed an explanation." The crowd murmured in agreement, voices rising with demands for answers. Carden shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence slipping. He had expected compliance, maybe even fear, but not this. Elijah wasn't just standing up for himself. He was forcing the officer to face the weight of his own actions. Carden's face tightened as the crowd pressed in, their murmurs growing louder. Phones were no longer discreetly held, but openly recording, their owners waiting for an explanation that the officer clearly wasn't prepared to give. Elijah remained still, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. He wasn't going to let this moment pass without accountability. "You're not going to answer?" Elijah asked, his voice carrying effortlessly over the noise of the crowd. "What's this description I supposedly fit?" Carden opened his mouth but no words came out. The truth was obvious to everyone watching. There had never been a description, just an excuse. Elijah let the silence stretch between them before speaking again, his voice now tinged with sharpness. "Let me guess. Black man, walking down the street, minding his own business. That about sums it up, doesn't it?" A wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few people called out in agreement, while others shook their heads, their frustration evident. Carden's jaw clenched, but he still had no response. "You see, officer," Elijah continued, stepping forward slightly. "This wasn't about public safety. It was about power. You thought you could intimidate me, maybe escalate this into something worse. But you didn't expect me to stay calm, did you?" Carden's face flushed red, his authority slipping with every word Elijah spoke. The situation had turned against him, and for the first time he realized he wasn't the one in control anymore. Elijah stood firm, his gaze locked onto Carden's, refusing to let him escape the weight of the moment. The officer had come into this encounter with power, with the expectation that his badge alone would demand obedience. But now, under the scrutiny of a growing crowd and countless recording phones, that power was slipping away. "You didn't expect me to be a Navy SEAL," Elijah said, his voice unwavering. "You didn't expect me to have the discipline to stay level-headed, or the experience to see through your game." The crowd murmured in agreement, their frustration turning into vocal support. Some shook their heads, while others openly called out phrases like, "We see what's happening here," and "Hold him accountable." Carden's shoulders stiffened, but his silence spoke louder than any justification he could have given. He had nothing to defend his actions. Elijah turned slightly, addressing the watching crowd now. "This isn't just about me," he continued, his voice strong yet measured. "It's about the countless times this happens to people who don't have a camera watching, who don't have the training to push back. This isn't justice, it's harassment, and it needs to stop." Applause and words of agreement rippled through the crowd. Carden swallowed hard, his earlier arrogance gone. He had expected to be in control, but Elijah had turned the tables. Now it was the officer who had to answer for his actions, and this time the whole world was watching. Carden shifted uncomfortably, his once commanding presence now reduced to an image of uncertainty and frustration. The authority he had wielded so carelessly was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. The crowd around him had grown larger, their voices carrying the weight of long-held grievances. "I was just doing my job," Carden stammered, attempting to regain control. Elijah let out a quiet breath, his expression unreadable. "If this is how you define your job, then maybe you're not cut out for it," he said, his words striking with surgical precision. A ripple of approval moved through the crowd. More voices chimed in, some calling for accountability, others demanding an apology. The shift in power was undeniable. Carden was no longer the one conducting the interrogation. He was the one being judged. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up with deliberate ease. "Here's the deal, officer," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "You're going to stand here in front of all these people and explain why you stopped me, or—" He let the implication hang in the air, tapping his phone screen lightly. Carden's face paled. He had assumed this encounter would be routine, another moment of unquestioned authority. Instead, he was now faced with the reality that his actions had consequences. He wasn't just answering to Elijah, he was answering to everyone watching, and for the first time, it was clear that he had no way out. The weight of the moment bore down on Officer Carden as he stood frozen, the sea of recording phones capturing every second of his hesitation. His earlier confidence had crumbled, replaced by the stark realization that he was no longer in control. Elijah, standing tall and unwavering, had made sure of that. "You don't owe me an apology," Elijah said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "You owe every single person here an explanation for why you thought you could abuse your power." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. The crowd leaned in, waiting for a response that Carden couldn't seem to find. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, knowing that no excuse would be enough to justify what had just unfolded. Elijah took a slow step forward, his voice unwavering. "Here's the truth, Officer Carden. You didn't expect me to push back. You thought you could get away with this because you've done it before, but not today." The crowd erupted in agreement, their voices rising in support. Carden had come into this encounter expecting submission. Instead, he had been met with resistance, with truth, and with the undeniable power of accountability. And now, for the first time, he was the one being watched. One of the most important lessons from this encounter is the power of calm resilience in the face of injustice. Elijah did not respond with anger or fear. He responded with confidence, intelligence, and control. This is a reminder that true strength is not about physical force, but about composure and knowing one's worth. For older generations, this lesson resonates deeply. Many have faced moments in life where they were judged unfairly or underestimated, yet dignity and wisdom often prove to be the greatest tools for overcoming these challenges. Elijah's response teaches us that standing up for oneself does not always require confrontation. It requires clarity, patience, and the ability to turn the situation in your favor. Moreover, this story highlights the importance of accountability. In today's world, where injustice still exists, we must remember that silence enables wrongdoing. By speaking up, not just for ourselves but for others, we create a society where fairness and respect are upheld. Whether through words, actions, or simply supporting those who are wronged, we all have a role to play in ensuring justice. This is not just a lesson for the young, it is a reminder for all generations that dignity, wisdom, and courage will always be stronger than fear and oppression.